Start, Madhuri.
Okay, ma'am. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another insightful session of Creative Weekend Talk, episode 165. I'm your host, Sai Madhuri, and it's wonderful to have you all join us today. Creative is a vibrant community of curious minds dedicated to sharing and expanding knowledge. Our tagline, Knowledge Square, sharing knowledge increases our knowledge, reflects our mission to explore topics behind conventional academics and encourage constructive thinking. We hold our weekend talk on Zoom every Saturday from 3 to 4 p.m. and live stream the session on our YouTube channel Creative GBD, making our discussions accessible to a broader audience. Today's topic is development of Swaraj. This session will delve into the journey and significance of Swaraj in shaping self-reliance and independence. We are honored to have Mr. Sumans as our guest speaker for this session with his depth of knowledge and insight. We look forward to understand the evolution and impact of Swaraj in greater detail. Afrin, a creative volunteer, is here to give a brief information about today's speaker. Over to Afrin.
हाँ Good afternoon to everyone. I am Afreen, a creative volunteer. Today I am here to introduce our today's speaker. Somnath Kolagi, born on January 5th, 1992, in a, in a scholar specializing in sustainable development inspired by Gandhian philosophy. He holds a PhD in international development from the University of Sussex, UK, focused on development as Swaraj through a case study of Karnataka's Khadi sector. Additionally, he earned Khadi sector. Additionally, he earned as MSc in Biodiversity, Conservation and Management from the University of Oxford, UK, and a BSc in the Botany, Zoology, and Science from the University of Mysore, India. Kolegi has received prestigious fellowships and grants, including the Oxford Indira Gandhi Graduate Scholarship, and participated in research projects like studying Desi cotton land races for sustainable agriculture. His extensive contribution to academy, including journals and magazines, article, newspapers, features, and a book development as Swaraj towards a sustainable and equitable future. His research focuses on the sustainable development, ecological equity, and Swaraj practical applications. He has delivered lectures at leading institutions and for formers on Gandhian principle and their relevant to modern challenges. Currently, he coordinates the Janapada's Khadi initiative under the Janapada Seva Trust, which promotes non-violent social order recognized by the media platforms such as Hindu and Deccan Heralds. Kolegi blends academic insight with grassroots activism. We welcome you, sir, for today's creative section. I welcome all the participants for today's section. Over to Sai Madhuryaka.
Thank you, Afrin. Wow, actually, an inspiring biodata SR is having. Without further ado, let's begin episode 165 of Creative. Over to you, Mr. Sumans.
Thanks, Madhuri and Afreen, for the introduction. And first of all, I'm happy to be here and sharing my thoughts. So today I'll be talking about the conception of development. And so it will have two parts. The first part will talk about a little bit more in detail about the idea, the idea of development, whatever we have today. And then I'll be talking a little more about what are the problems with the existing development idea, and then what is an alternate, basically seeing Swaraj as an alternate model of development. And then the second part largely deals with what we are trying to do in Melkote in Mandya district of Karnataka, where we are trying to bring this whole idea of Swaraj development into practice. So I'll be sharing a little more, in the second part about the practice basically. So now let me just share the slide with all of you. Okay. So yeah, today I'll be talking about this whole idea of development as Swaraj. And as you all know, today development has become a very central conception around which the larger global social order is kind of revolving, right? So you go and talk to anybody in remote village or in urban centers. Everybody aspires for this idea of development. Everybody wants to get developed. But often, when we talk about this notion, so it's usually this is what this is the kind of idea of good life we have, because any development paradigm underlies is actually kind of driven by an idea of good life. And today's development model largely driven by this kind of a idea of good life, that is that you could see on the screen, right? We should have a big house to live and big cars and basically urban centers and big huge roads. And these are all kind of symbols of our idea of good life, right? Even nation states, for example, they also have very similar kind of idea of good life that is kind of driving our existing development model. So, for example, if there is a village, if it has just a bus stand today, tomorrow the state or nation, the aspiration will be to bring an airport to that village, right? We see that as a development model. Or as individuals, if you have a kind of a two-wheeler, tomorrow you need four-wheeler. If you have a four-wheeler, then you need much more higher end cars like this. It's all our idea of development today is kind of centered around uh, accumulation of more and more material and power, right? So that is seen as a way of getting developed. So then what is the problem? Why should we worry about having this kind of idea of good life, and which is driving our existing development model? So basically, as I told you earlier, so development is essentially an act where we are trying to uh, you know bring our idea of good life much more closer to the reality, right? So that's a whole exercise is nothing but a development. And the problem is today, having this kind of a development notion is of two big challenges. So one is of environment, as you all know. So we are losing out kind of fundamentals of life like air, water, and soil, which are something very essential for our existence. And there are a lot of evidences that are out there today. It's showing that we only have next to 3 to 5 decades. If we continue like this, we won't have we will end up having a planet where we cannot sustain ourselves anymore, right? So that's why environment has become a big challenge for the humanity today. And one of the major reasons for that is this kind of a material centered development idea, right? Because if you want more and more material wealth, you have to take more and more resources from the planet, right? So since the planet has very limited resources, and also the whole process has a lot of pollution that happens, so we are losing out this fundamentals of life. So that's why we should be everybody should be thinking about how we could come out of this problem of environment. And the second big problem is that we are facing is inequality, right? If we, for example, as an example, if we consider wealth, for example, right? So the latest Oxfam report, if you see last year, whatever the wealth generated in the country, almost 75% is kind of is in the hands of top 10% of people, right? Or even the overall wealth in our country, where almost 40% is in the hands of only top 1% of people. So this clearly shows how rich is getting richer and poor is getting poorer. And if this kind of inequality sort of happens, then it would lead to a massive violence in the society, right? So that's why we have two big problems today. So one is of environment, the other one is of inequality, and these two problems are directly connected to our idea of development. What we see as an idea of good life. And in this context, then what is a right way of development? What is the right way of idea of good life? So, to answer these questions, basically, we are feeling Gandhi, and Gandhi is already well known, Mahatma Gandhi, and the other person which is on the right side is called J.C. Kumarappa. Right? Unfortunately, not many people know him. So, J.C. Kumarappa was a trained economic thinker from Colombia, and who works with Mahatma Gandhi for almost 2 decades, from 1930s to 1950s. And he was the one who gave a lot of economic dimensions for Gandhian thought. And Gandhi and Kumarappa, as you all know, have spoken and have written extensively on various issues. But the central thread that passes through their thoughts and action is actually the idea of Swaraj, right? The central idea that really they were focusing on was the idea of Swaraj. Then what is that, right? So for them, Swaraj means self-rule. Where it's basically about how we can create an exploitation free society where everybody can have more control over their life, right? How to build such a non-violent society was the central quest that Gandhi and Kumarappa were dealing with. And they both were trying to understand the development basically through three dimensions. It's called moral political economy, right? So it has three elements. One is morality, the other one is politics, the other one is economy. So morality is basically a sense of right and wrong, and politics is largely about power relationships or human relationships. How it is present in a society, and economy is largely material relationships. How whatever the materials, commodities that we require. So basically, how we produce it and how we consume it and how we dispose it. So right. So these are the three forces. Basically, they realize that these are the three forces that actually acts together and shapes our living condition or human condition, right? So that's why for them, so this is the kind of a difference. Then what is their idea of Swaraj as a development model? If we compare that to our existing, the so-called sustainable development, for example, right? So basically, any development idea, it is actually kind of rooted in cosmology or worldviews, basically how we relate ourselves to the larger world, right? So today's development vision is basically centered around the conception that individuals are completely autonomous, and we really don't need to we really don't have any connections with the larger world. Basically, that is the underlying assumption that is out there, right? That's why generally, right, we always think about ourselves, or largely to an extent of the family, not beyond that, right? We really don't care about the larger society beyond our family or environment. So, but here in the idea of Swaraj, it is based on a very different kind of cosmology. It's called as truth. Truth means basically for Gandhi and Kumarappa, it was interconnectedness of life. Basically, an understanding that in a world, uh, there is nothing called completely autonomous, right? Everything is interconnected. And so, for example, just to understand this cosmology or this worldview, for example, food on our plate, right? Food is something which is very essential for our existence. And if you just trace back, how that food has become possible. So if you just trace back, there are so many people, irrespective of different caste people, different gender people, right, different religion. All these people have contributed to our food, right? So somebody might have sort of have sown the seeds, and some might someone else have kind of harvested it. Someone else should have kind of transported that to a shop, and then from there we are getting it. So if you really look back, how this food, which is essential for our existence, so you really understand that just so every lot of people are contributing to it, and not only human beings, even non-human beings as well, right? So for example, honeybees, right? So if we don't have bees today, so you will not have kind of, for example, coffee on your table today, right? Because bees are very essential for pollination. So it clearly shows that how our existence, especially the food, is basically the result of the contributions made by all other beings in the world, right? Not only humans, even non-human beings as well. So that's why here the morality, if you come, so in the idea of Swaraj, it's actually emphasizes on individual good is embedded in the good of all, right? So that's why we should always about thinking about the larger good, not just only about yourself or just only to your family, right? That is the major difference. But here in the prevailing sustainable development model, it's largely about thinking about yourself or your family, not beyond that, right? So this is the major difference in terms of morality. And then if you come to the politics, how human relationships are actually being formed. So in the sustainable development or prevailing development model, it actually emphasizes on centralization of power, centralization of human relationships, right? It could be in a family or it could be in a nation state level, for example, right? So a lot of decisions that affects our life is today, if you take state as an example, a lot of decisions is actually kind of taken at Bangalore or in Delhi, right? So, for example, as a citizen of Melkote, I really don't have much choice to decide, how Melkote should look like, right? A lot of these decisions are actually being made at state headquarters or at the national capital, right? So it clearly shows it's actually about centralization. Very few people will be deciding taking the major decisions that impacts the life of a larger society, right? And even though the sustainable development talks about democracy is the key, but it will be based on domination, right? So even if you take our own democracy, for example, so whatever 51% people, majority people say, that becomes the rule, right? And whatever the 49% or minority won't have any say in it, right? So that's a big problem. That's why always majority will be kind of a decider, and the rest they just have to follow it. So very hierarchical kind of relationships, human relationships are actually in the form of in the our existing democracy that is kind of comes under the larger our sustainable development or development vision. And even often violence is kind of accepted, as a means to bring a kind of a certain kind of power relationships or human relationships in a society, especially by the state, right? So for example, if there is a protest is happening, then if state decides, it could actually send their police force or military to stop it. So basically, through by force, a certain kind of social order is actually maintained in the existing development model in terms of politics. But this is completely contrary if you see the Swaraj development model, where even though it talks about democracy, but it talks about non-violent democracy, right? So non-violent democracy means it actually emphasizes on decentralization of power. So the whole argument is that since everything is interconnected, it's not like one person should be taking control of everybody else. Instead of that, any decisions that impact the lives of individuals, so that decision should be just so close to that individual, right? So that's why it actually emphasizes that more and more decisions needs to be taken at the level of village, for example, right? So where people can directly participate and take decisions, not like today, right, where a lot of decisions are taken in Bangalore or Delhi, as I told you earlier, right? So that's why decentralization of power is very important here. And also in this whole idea of decentralization, it actually kind of based on consensus, not based on majoritarian rule, right? Since everybody is interconnected and everybody is not completely detached from each other, so it becomes very important for us to have a space where everybody can directly participate and directly come to an agreement and then take decisions, right? Through that, everybody gets more and more control over their life, right? So in majoritarian decision making, what happens is that very few people will take and rest will just follow it. But here in non-violent democracy, since it's based on consensus, so it's basically everybody comes together and then take decisions, together. So that's a major difference between existing democracy and the non-violent democracy. And also here, the satyagraha is often, Gandhi is quite well known for satyagrahas, right? Satyagraha means insistence on truth. So what does it mean? It basically the whole idea that any exploitative system, any system where one person is controlling the other person, that kind of a relationship exists in a society because there is a cooperation between oppressor and the oppressed, right? They both are cooperating with each other. That's why that kind of an exploitative system is still thriving. So that's why here, what Gandhi and Kumarappa actually demands, especially the individuals, especially the oppressed, is to put up resistance against this kind of exploitation through the act of love, right? Because even the oppressor is not and he is also a part of yourself, right? Because the whole cosmology is such that everything is interconnected in the world. So that's why the oppressor is also kind of a part of the same larger whole. He's not completely he is not completely detached from our own self, right? So that's why here act of love becomes very important. Basically, through that you will be changing the oppressor's viewpoint and then bringing a much more harmonious relationship between the two, right? That's why here satyagraha becomes very, very important. And satyagraha doesn't mean that it should always be against the state, right? Satyagraha, for them, it should be part of our everyday life, right? Even within our families, we should able to, perform satyagraha. Basically, if you're not being able to take decisions based on consensus, then any person who feels he's kind of oppressed, he should able to put up a resistance against the oppressor, right? So that's why the whole idea of satyagraha should become a part of our everyday life. And then, in terms of economy, what should be the material relationships? If you see that, so in the prevailing development model, it is based on idea of efficiency, right? So, in a set time, how much maximum we can produce and how much maximum we can consume, that becomes an important rule. And a lot of things at the end of the day, we really like to export things, right? Always good quality, the first grade quality products. So always we would like to sell it to the far away places, export it, and whatever much more inferior grade, we basically use it locally, right? So basically, because it's seen as something purchasing which is imported is seen as much more better than something which is produced locally, right? That kind of an understanding it has in the sustainable development model. And also, it basically sees any material exchange is devoid of morality. There is no ethics embedded in it, right? And also, largely, economy is driven by fossil fuels, right? So that is the kind of a major characteristics of economy in our existing sustainable development model. But here in the Swaraj development model, the economy is something very different, right? Here, instead of efficiency, it is based on idea of self-sufficiency, right? Self-sufficiency doesn't mean that a person should be able to produce all the things that he needs, but rather it's about reducing the distance between producer and consumer, right? So why it is important? Because in the idea of Swaraj, material exchange is also a moral exchange, right? It actually recognizes that anything that we purchase in the market, it also has during the production process, it will have a kind of an impact on society and environment, right? So for example, today a lot of big brands, clothing brands, for example, if you see, a lot of these brands are being produced in a very exploitative conditions, like for example places in like Dhaka, where a lot of garment factory workers, they don't even get living incomes, right? They work in so much of regimented conditions, and often rapes happens in those spaces. So in such a harsh conditions, our branded garments are being produced largely, all the fast fashion brands. And as a consumer sitting in Bangalore or in Mysore, purchasing that, so we also indirectly becoming a part in that exploitation that's happening in Dhaka, right? So that's why if we really need to lead an ethical life, it becomes inevitable for us to purchase which is locally produced, because that is the only way where you can actually uh, look at how a particular product is being produced and who produces it in what condition, and if you pay some money, who is getting what share. All these things, you can realize only if you're buying which is, you're buying which is produced locally, right? So that is the kind of a major difference. And also the other important component in the economy of Swaraj development, it's actually primarily driven by human energy, because it clearly recognizes that because everything else, it could be a philosophy, art, and culture, everything else comes only after we fulfill our stomach, right? So how we fulfill our basic material needs is very, very important. And any these kind of livelihood occupations, so it's important to recognize that it's driven by certain kind of an energy, right? And today, as I told you, a lot of our economy or our livelihoods are driven by fossil fuels. And as you all know, we have three major problems with using this fossil fuel as our energy source to run our economic systems, right? So one is, it has very few people has, kind of have control over these resources. Not everybody have control over it, right? So even a lot of global wars are happening to have control over these kind of fossil resources. So that's why whoever controls these resources will be controlling everybody else's lives, right? So if petrol price increases, how everything else increases, the price of all other products, right? It really shows that how whoever controls these energy resources will be controlling everybody's lives, right? So that is a one big problem that we have with the fossil fuels, because it has very few people have access to it. And the second problem is there is a huge and negative impact on environment, right? All the way from uh, you know uh, taking oil from reserves to using it. So there is so much of environmental impact is out there, right? The whole issue of climate change and global warming. So that is a second big problem. So that's why we should really need to get out of this. And the third is it's a it's not completely renewable, right? So it gets empty after a certain years. So that's why we have these three big problems. Today, as an alternate, the so-called sustainable development is actually pitching the idea of green energy, right? Green energies like solar and wind and other things as an alternate to fossil fuels. So, but in reality, we should realize that even these resources are not green as much as we are thinking, right? So, for example, if you take solar as an example, so instead of kind of mining oil, we would be mining silica for our solar panels, right? So at the end of the day, environmental impact is the same, right? The resource control will be with a very few people, right? But we are only shifting the sources. This is a big problem, right? That's why even the so-called green energies like solar and wind and other things, they're not actually green as much as we're thinking. So in this context, the Swaraj development paradigm, it actually advocates physical labor as an energy source. So because human energy is the only energy source that everybody has access to it and is completely renewable, it's the most eco-friendly energy source. And the third is, it's completely renewable, right? Basically, it's renewable. Everybody has access to it, and it's completely eco-friendly. So that's why human energy is kind of becomes a primary driving force in the economy of Swaraj development paradigm. So this is broadly the difference. So in the if you have to go back to this idea of good life that is driving two development models. So here it is always centered around accumulating more and more power and material is seen as having that as a good life in the prevailing development model. But here in this Swaraj development model, the idea of good life is basically seen in terms of peace, right? So once you fulfill your basic material needs like food, clothing, and shelter, the idea of progress should shift to more to a moral or spiritual plane, right? So where attaining peace means having an internal mind of tranquility as well as external harmonious relationship with other beings in the world, right? So achieving that becomes important in life. So this is a kind of a major difference between existing sustainable development and the Swaraj development paradigm, right? So this is I just wanted to share regarding the idea part. And now I would like to sort of share a bit more about the practice, how we are trying to bring this whole idea of Swaraj into practice in Melkote. So basically, I would like to share two initiatives. So one is the Khadi, right? Khadi, as you all know, it's a handspun and hand-woven textile, and it has a very unique history in our country, right? Because it was a part of our freedom struggle. And and also Mahatma Gandhi thought that Khadi is one of the important ways to attain Swaraj or to establish this sort of a non-violent society. So that's why here we are trying to, what we have done is, so through this Khadi activity, the whole objective of the Khadi is to build this sort of a non-violent community, right? It is not about making the fabric at the end of the day. It's actually about building an exploitation-free community where everybody can have more control over their life, right? So how to do that is a central quest. So that's what we are trying to do with through this Khadi activity. And in this whole activity, there are about dozen people part of it, and largely women. And as I told you, the focus is actually on people, not on material what we produce. Right here, our primary goal is to make sure that people who are involved in this collective are, their happiness is important for us, uh, and also making sure that they will have more control over their life. Basically, that is our primary objective in this activity. And so, as I told you, in the idea of Swaraj, so human relationships should be largely managed by consensus, right? Not based on majoritarian rule. So that's why here, what we have managed to create a system where everybody, have kind of invested in the enterprise, so that everybody has ownership in it, right? So there is no hierarchy of owner and wage laborer. Here, everybody is a owner and everybody is a worker. So that's kind of a system we have managed to evolve. So since everybody is a owner, so what we do is all the decisions are taken based on consensus. So we all sit together and then take decisions that is related to the Khadi enterprise, right? So by doing this, we have made sure that everybody will have more control over their life, right? It's not like one person is taking decisions, everybody else have to just following it. So that we managed to break. And the other is we also realize that so there is an optimum scale for all the activities. So since our focus is actually on people and then their participation in decision making process through consensus, so there is a lot of evidence that shows there is an inherent limit of 30 to 50 people, right? If any group that goes beyond this number, what happens is that taking decisions based on consensus becomes more and more difficult. So that's why here our idea of growth is more horizontal. It's not like today we are about dozen people, tomorrow we should have 100 people. So we are not thinking in that way. Instead of that, the idea is that today, if you have a dozen people, then similar kind of collectives should pop up at different places. That's how we are seeing of scaling it up, right? A group of 30 people should pop up at different people, different places, and it should be run on themselves, right? So it's not like centralized system. So that's how we are seeing the idea of growth here. And also we have brought in a lot of financial transparency since everybody's owner. So we have come up with a passbook there where everybody knows the financial position of the enterprise. It's not like very few people will know the financial side of it. Rest all will be just working as wage laborers, right? So that is not the case here. And also we have set a cap on income share, right? Often, if you see the companies, for example, today, CEOs will be earning lakhs of rupees, where a sweeper in the same company probably earning few thousand rupees, right? So there is an inherent inequality that emerges. So that's why to reduce that, we have consciously kept a ratio as 1:3, right? If highest is earning 300 rupees, for example, per day, and lowest would be 100 rupees, let's say. So if highest wants 600 rupees, then he should make sure that lowest would get 200 rupees, right? You cannot go beyond this ratio. So that is something very, very important. And also we have realized that basically, we also create a lot of other social security funds. For example, health fund out of profit. We have created a health fund for health emergencies, retirement fund. If somebody want moving out of the collective, they get some lump sum amount. And also we have created another fund called God's Aid, where often the women who are part of it, they require small amount of money for petrol, for chapel, for books, other things. So what we thought was we thought that we'll keep 1% of the profit, and we call it as God shade. How it works is basically, we have kept this money in a box, right? And nobody will be monitoring it. If somebody wants, they can directly go and take that money from that box, but they have to voluntarily write down how much they have taken in the book that we have kept near the box, right? So in a month's time, they have to return it back if possible with some interest. Basically, the idea is that there is no person will be looking after this fund, right? It's basically everybody should voluntarily, honestly should operate. Basically, that's the whole idea. And initially, we started off with 2,000 rupees 3, 4 years back. Then there's a lot of hesitation that we can't keep money like that. So somebody will take it away. But interestingly, after 1 year, the 2,000 rupees had gone up to 2,300 rupees, right? So then now we have kept almost 10,000 rupees like that, where everybody is whenever they want, they use it and put it back. That it clearly shows how, if you really create such a right kind of an atmosphere, people actually do operate honestly, right? It's a very good example. And then also we have another fund called community development fund, where we use that for various other activities, because in our case what we have done is that we have fixed the limit on production itself, because today the biggest problem is this whole consumerism, right? We always have to think of producing more and making more money and consuming more. So this whole vicious circle is creating a lot of discontent in life. So that's why it's very important to have a limit on saying that I don't want money more than certain amount, right? Keeping that bar is something very, very essential. That's what we feel. So that's why here what we have done is that we have fixed the maximum on production. So for example, our weavers are not allowed to produce more than 160 meters a month, right? This is completely contrary to other production systems, where often there will be like minimum targets for people, right? They have to produce this much in a day or in an hour. But here this is completely contrary. So that's why once you reach that limit, you will get your living income, and in the rest of the time we try to engage in other activities like reading, watching films or documentaries, going for exposure visits, theaters. All these things are kind of a part of the activity, part of the Khadi initiative, because we feel that it's important, because the whole idea of Swaraj development paradigm is both a moral and material project, right? So we should be working with the material conditions of people as well as the morality of people. So that's what we are trying to do with this. So this is just one example how we have tried to build a system which is completely exploitative free, and which is, since it's completely driven by human energy, it's completely eco-friendly as well, right? So this is just an example of Swaraj development paradigm that we have tried to build in Melkote. And these are some of the pictures I just wanted to show. The top left is one of the performances they did as a part of our theater activity, and the top right is, these are our weavers wearing their own saris, that they had woven for our websites. And the bottom left one is actually as part of exposure visits, we had gone to North Karnataka to understand in a situation of actual weaving communities, traditional weaving communities. And the bottom right is basically we engage all of them to be part of making the designs, right? Often the problem today is any work will have two components. So one is a repetitive part, the other one is creative element, creative part. So today we all wants to retain this creative part, and the repetitive part we want to shift it to somebody else, right? So that's why often what happens in textile industry is that the designing part, the creative element is actually done by so-called designers, right? The weavers will at the end of the day they just becomes like a machine. So just to break that here, so we are actually encouraging our weavers themselves to come up with their own designs, right? So trying to bridge this whole repetition and creativity together. So that's what we are trying to do. So these are some of the this is how we tried to make this whole idea of Swaraj into a reality. So this is what I just wanted to share, and I just wanted to share about a little more about other. We have another education program. It's called Jeevan Shale. I don't like to get into that at the moment because I think it's already getting late. Probably if there is any questions, I think I'm happy to answer. So this is what I just wanted to say. Thank you.
Hello, sir.
Uh, can I say something?
Hello.
Hello.
Ha, sir. Go ahead. Ha.
Yeah, Somanas, it was a very interesting narrative. Thank you so much for accepting and delivering it. Question is, say, of course, it is sad or unfortunate for us also in the current prevailing situation, how much people adore Gandhi, how much people they do it, but still there are some small group of people, whether it is theater or people like you, are trying to propagate the value system of Gandhi. I agree with that. The difficulties are there. That is a different point to address. However, when it comes to the Swaraj, Khadi, self-rule, or what you called indigenous or in-house, so many things. These are part of our Indian culture and tradition. Don't you think that is Gandhian as an epoch we should consider, or even well before Gandhi, this type of things were existing? Maybe Gandhi was one instrumental to promote such kind of a thing. Do I really need to give epoch to Gandhi, or even pre-Gandhi, or even well before that? This type of systems were there, which you are also successfully doing in Melukote. Of course, you are admirers of Gandhi, but still, do we have to think in that direction in the current scenario to make this particular revolution as more relevant? Is what my just on
Right.
question.
Right. So even one is we are not even though we admire Gandhi, we are not no. It's a big today. The big problem is all our the so-called important the makers of our modern India. We make them as gods, right? That's a big problem. So we really want to see them as ordinary human beings, and then only we get inspiration from them, right? That's how we are seeing Gandhi. Gandhi is just an ordinary person like us, and of course any person will have positives and negatives, and that's even applies for everybody. It's not just only for Gandhi or for it applies for everybody. And even as Gandhi himself said, whatever a lot of these ideas that he sort of advocated, it's kind of largely has taken it from our own culture as well as from the West, from both the end. And today, and also as I told you that during my presentation today, the problem of we are thinking ourselves as our own culture. What is our culture, right? If you really understand, for example, human evolution, we all come from Africa, right? So it's seeing ourselves, even the nation. That's what Tagore was saying. So we're seeing, even the how we see our nation is also a very important question, right? So we think that we had everything earlier. That's also a big problematic, and we should be able to see ourselves as a part of the larger globe, and even that's how the whole ecology works, right? In reality, if what something is happening in South America, it's going to impact us today, right? That's how the whole world or ecology environment works. And even as I told you, our own history, it's basically goes beyond our national boundaries. So that's why in that context, I'm saying that, thinking that we had everything earlier, perfect culture, everything answer in our own earlier Indian culture. So I have a big problem using the word of Indian itself, in the, for that matter. But as Gandhi himself said, he's not like something. He's not saying very new things. It's basically he's drawing a lot of things from whatever through his experience in the West as well as in India. He's basically basically using his common sense and advocating this. Even we ourselves, we are not doing this activity or working around this idea, not because Gandhi said it, right? Instead of that, it's just a common sense. So that's why I think today the lacking is the common sense today. So if you have that, then automatically whatever I said today, it starts making sense. So that's my kind of response. Basically, it's not about
Yeah,
Gandhi said it. It's basically about a common sense. That's what we should be using.
yeah, I agree with you. Maybe if you like 2 decades back, there was
Yeah.
a similar idea called Pura by Abdul Kalam,
Hmm.
where it is contradictory to the idea of development which you are now propagating through this talk. Providing urban facilities in rural area is called Pura. So how do you look at that type of, right now that idea is not being uh, taken up or not being done, but however similar developments are happening at village level, where every village is now having more cars, more diesel petrol dependent lifestyle. So many things are happening. As you rightly pointed out, development is centered around acquiring some kind of a material hood or some kind of a big buildings, all those things. So the Pura concept, 2 decades back, it was floated. That time everybody championed it. Now it is not much in public debate. Like similar ideas may be there elsewhere. Such kind of ideas, how is it going to be seeing in future? Your idea, these ideas like that,
No,
multiple
whatever,
ideas.
it's not, whatever you said, converting villages into small cities. At the end of the day, that's the whole idea of sustainable development, right? That's what the whole every nation state is trying to do, and the driving force behind it is the same idea of good life that you just said, right? It's centered around accumulation of more and more material wealth and power. So having this kind of a development model, we really cannot it won't take us to the longer run, because as I told you, one of the big problems that we're facing is of environment. So once your focus is on having this kind of a idea of good life, it completely contradicts our our ecological realities, right? So that's why I feel
Yeah,
that unless we bring this radical change in our idea of progress and development, where I'm not saying that we should not having any kind of material needs, right? So definitely there is a need for everybody should have all the basic material needs, like food and shelter and clothing and everything. Everybody should have. But once you have this, then the idea of progress should shift from material to non-material. Basically, that's what the idea of Swaraj is saying, and I feel that whether we like it or not, if we want to sustain on this planet, so that kind of a change in our idea of development should happen. So otherwise, I think we'll be having very short time on this planet. So
yeah.
that's what I think.
Thank you, Sumnas. I think I appreciate both your Janapada Trust and yourself, your father, what you are doing. It's a role model. Hope many people get inspired by your work. Thank you so much for answering. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Over to Supriya. Supriya.
हाँ सर. Sir, how impactful this concept is working, sir? Just to know what is the changes you are observing, or any progress you are seeing in this concept, sir.
So, so it's basically as I told you, whatever we are trying to do is set right kind of an examples and inspire others to do. Right, that's what we've been doing, and we are quite successful in that. Even for example, you are inviting me for to give a talk. It's actually clearly showing that the impact of whatever work we are doing. Right. So the society is slowly recognizing whatever we are doing, and then we are quite hopeful about it. And also, it's not like we are doing this as our dharma, right? We are doing this as our duty, because there is a very clear understanding in the between means and ends, right? As Gandhi was saying, as human beings, we only have kind of limited control over the means and nothing over the outcome, right? For example, we can decide to fly from, for example, travel from Bangalore to Mysore, right? There is no 100% guarantee that we reach there, right? Anything could happen in between, right? So that's why as human beings we only have control, or we can only do the process, right, without expecting any outcome from that. So we are also seeing this whole idea of Swaraj in that manner, right? We are doing this as our dharma, we're really not expecting something big out of this. And as I told you, this is we are trying to set examples and inspiring others. That's what that's essentially what we are doing. And we really don't think that probably next few years we'll make sure that the larger world will be revolving around the idea of Swaraj. Even though we like that, we also very clearly we understand that we really don't have much control over the outcomes, right? So that's why it's more about the process of doing it and enjoying that process. So I think we are doing that. So yeah.
And yeah, any plans of doing in other places, sir, extending this concept?
So we are not interested in going and doing this anybody some other places, but a lot of people have sort of got inspiration from this work and they're trying in their own way in their own places. So that's how we see it. That's how it should replicate. So for example, there are 2-3 people from Tamil Nadu who are already doing this kind of collectives. In one person in Erode, Erode for example is a center for power looms, right? So in that center now he has gone back and he has started a handloom collective and working on the similar lines, right? And also similarly, there's another person near Dingle, he's doing it. And there are a lot of people have got inspiration, and not 100% exactly, but got inspiration and doing in their own ways. That's across the country is happening. And so as I told you, it's our intention is always just to set examples and showcase the possibilities. We never want to expand ourselves. And the whole idea of expansion means you are getting into more and more centralized system, right? So today if you have a collective here, tomorrow if you have 100 collectives across the Karnataka, for example, then we'll have a much more centralized system to organize everything. So here the whole purpose is completely against that. So that's why, so we really don't like to work ourselves in different places, but we would like to set right kind of grounded examples in our place and inspire others to take it up and do it in their own places. That's how we are seeing it.
Any background support or anything else for
So of course we share, whoever comes here, we of course our share our journeys, our learnings, our challenges. So always we share that. So that knowledge sharing is always happens.
Mhm. Very nice. New concepts and new thoughts. It's running successful also. Thank you, Sumana sir. It's a very unique and different concept which we are seeing. Uh, uh, thank you very much for accepting our invitation and engaging us with your concept. Thank you, sir.